Okay, let's dive straight into this. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating explainer on a philosophical manifesto called Go Solo, Seek God, Be Better. It's a really specific, powerful framework about modern masculinity and personal responsibility. We're going to objectively break down exactly how this text defines strength and the architecture of building a life from the ground up.
No one is coming to save you. Just let that hard truth from the source material sink in for a second. The author establishes right out of the gate that the absolute rock-solid foundation of this entire philosophy is complete self-reliance. And it's not meant to be depressing, actually. It's meant to be an awakening. The idea here is that your life is entirely in your own hands, governed completely by your discipline and your actions. You literally cannot wait around for a rescuer.
And that leads us straight to a pretty direct challenge posed by the text. When will you finally accept responsibility for what you are and, honestly, what you could be? Because stepping into the arena of manhood, according to the author, means abandoning all your excuses. Blaming society, your current circumstances, your family, or just bad luck, sure, it might feel relieving in the short term, but it builds absolutely nothing. The source argues that responsibility is heavy, there's no doubt about that, but it's the only weight that actually makes a person stronger.
So that brings us to the first pillar of our framework, Part 1, the reality of manhood.
To really grasp this reality, we have to clear up some of the text's major criticisms of modern culture. The source makes a bold move to redefine manhood, completely stripping away today's obsession with visibility and getting attention. It argues that being a man is absolutely not about making noise, dominating others, or just being the loudest guy in the room. Instead, there's this stark contrast drawn between a boy and a man. Immaturity, it claims, is reacting emotionally, constantly seeking comfort, and running away from discomfort at all costs. But a disciplined man? He responds deliberately. He actively seeks competence, and he understands one absolutely crucial truth. Discomfort is temporary, but weakness is incredibly expensive. The text basically says internal authority is the ultimate dividing line. It dictates who obeys their impulses and who actually commands them.
To really anchor this concept, the source points back to the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who famously said, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be one." The text uses this to drive home the point that readiness is earned entirely through doing, not planning, not daydreaming, and definitely not waiting until you miraculously feel confident or inspired. In this framework, feelings are just unreliable advisors. It's action that clarifies identity. Doing hard things over and over again is what actually forges it.
Moving on to Phase 2 of the architecture. Section 2, the inner foundation.
The core argument here is that a man has to fix himself, his own internal structure, in private before he can ever hope to successfully face the outside world. The text suggests that chaos on the outside is usually just a reflection of chaos on the inside, and that most men fail quietly in private long before they ever fail loudly in public. So the first block of this inner foundation is solitude. And the source doesn't view going solo as some act of bitterness or permanent isolation. No, it's a critical, absolutely necessary tool. It argues that a man who never learns to stand alone will always end up leaning on others for his identity, borrowing their opinions, borrowing their confidence. Solitude strips away the performance. It forces absolute, brutal honesty and forges a truly unborrowed identity for those moments when no one else is watching. The second building block is humility. And notice how the text completely redefines this word. It defines humility simply as accuracy. It's knowing your strengths without exaggerating them and knowing your flaws without making a bunch of excuses. According to the author, it is absolutely not about self-hatred or shrinking yourself down just to make other people comfortable. It's framed as a strategic openness. It's what keeps a man teachable, sharp, and constantly improving. Whereas arrogance, well, that just blinds him to his own decay.
To tie this inner foundation together, the source pulls in a great quote from the ancient historian Plutarch. "The strongest man is he who is master of himself." True self-mastery, according to the text, boils down to restraint. Every single man has urges, fears, and impulses, right? But controlling them is what builds real, unpredictable strength. The philosophy posits that a man who is ruled by his impulses is entirely predictable, and predictable men are incredibly easy to exploit. But the calm, restrained man, he stays steady when everyone else collapses.
You are a man.
This phrase is a recurring motif woven throughout the text, serving as this punchy, grounding statement. It reminds the reader that this identity is not some fleeting trend. It's not a curated online persona, and it certainly isn't something you just accidentally stumble into. The source insists it demands lifelong discipline. No shortcuts, no blaming others, just committing to constant progress through daily discipline, even and especially when it's profoundly uncomfortable.
All right, with the inner foundation locked in, we shift to phase 3. Section 3, the outer armor.
Now let's break down the external tools that the source argues are absolutely non-negotiable if you want to navigate the physical world with true freedom and respect. The basic premise is that internal order has to eventually show up externally. The author lays out 3 specific pillars: education, money, and appearance. But here's the catch. They aren't framed as vanity or superficial status symbols. They are literal armor for stability. Education gives you the discernment to spot patterns and avoid traps. Money is viewed simply as a tool that buys freedom, time, and safety. It lets you protect instead of having to beg. And appearance? While the text claims it reflects your internal order and readiness, which essentially demands respect from whatever environment you walk into.
Reinforcing that first pillar of education, the text draws on Francis Bacon. Knowledge itself is power, but only when applied. The source heavily stresses that an uneducated man is incredibly vulnerable. It argues he's easily manipulated, he mistakes his own misplaced confidence for actual competence, and he constantly confuses loud noise for the truth. In this framework, true education isn't just about sitting in a classroom. It's about learning how the real world actually operates, from history and human psychology, all the way to understanding cause and consequence.
Which brings us to phase 4, section 4, redefining the competitor.
Now this is where the source completely dismantles our modern perception of what it actually means to compete. Modern culture tells us that competition is all about being loud, aggressive, and constantly proving something to everyone around you. But the text argues the exact opposite. It draws a huge contrast between the insecure man and the disciplined competitor. The insecure man, the author writes, burns through all his energy trying to prove he's superior. He acts loud and needs this constant, exhausting comparison to validate himself. But the disciplined competitor? He is incredibly patient, he remains consistent when everyone else gets emotional, and he conserves his energy to build actual undeniable skill. True competition, according to this philosophy, is about outlasting your opponent, not trying to intimidate them.
And the text outlines exactly how to do this through what it calls the boring advantages. These are straightforward systems of success. Waking up early consistently, training regularly without any hype, constantly studying and observing, managing your money with patience, and, this is a big one, enduring pure boredom to achieve mastery. The source notes that life almost always rewards duration over intensity. Mastering the mundane and doing what other people simply won't do for long enough gives you a massive, irreversible strategic advantage because it just relentlessly compounds over time.
The Renaissance thinker Michel de Montaigne writes, "The greatest thing in the world is to know how to belong to oneself." A man who belongs to himself, the text argues, doesn't waste time chasing trends. He sets his own pace. The source uses this reflection to explain a really vital truth within its framework: your truest rival is simply the man you were yesterday. If you can't outperform your own past habits, no external victory is ever going to satisfy you anyway.
And that brings us perfectly to our 5th and final section. Section 5, the weight of leadership.
Everything we've covered up to this point, the solitude, the restraint, the education, the disciplined competition, it's all framed as mere preparation for an ultimate purpose. And what is that purpose? Carrying responsibility for others. The source outlines this fascinating architecture of authority based on a strict cause and effect chain. It posits that everything starts with internal restraint. That restraint naturally builds trust with others. Trust, in turn, creates influence. Influence demands responsibility. And taking on that responsibility is the proving ground that ultimately results in true leadership. The core idea here is that internal calmness naturally creates external authority, without you ever having to demand it or force it on anyone.
As the philosopher Viktor Frankl so brilliantly noted, those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. This perfectly highlights how purpose transforms a man in this philosophy. When a man accepts a real burden or mission, whether that's providing for his family, mastering a complex craft, or leading a community, the author argues that feelings just become completely irrelevant. When there's a strict obligation, discipline shifts from being a chore to becoming a natural state, simply because necessity clarifies your priorities.
You are a man. We return to this stark motif one last time to anchor the final, overarching takeaway of the source material. Look, in this view, manhood isn't about the attention you can demand from the world. It's measured entirely by the weight you can carry without complaining. The text concludes that it's fundamentally about being profoundly useful, stable, and reliable, especially when everything around you is falling apart. It's about being that quiet, steady presence that other people can absolutely depend on.
So will you build yourself quietly, or will you fade loudly? The source leaves its readers with this incredibly provocative call to examine their own private standards. It argues that the world already has more than enough performative noise, and what it really needs are men built on quiet, unshakable consistency. So take that challenge and reflect on it today. Keep learning, keep building, and we'll catch you in the next explainer.